Of late, I have been urged by my loved ones, at least uh, one of them, to put together a video, whether or not I have the background and settings that are most appropriate, nevertheless, to use what's available at hand with some of my ideas and thoughts on the issue of futurity. The other day, I was sitting on my deck and I noticed out in the distance in the park where I sit across from a kite very high up in the sky. And I had a thought about the history of the kite and its meaning, its resonance for the development of humanity. Because you might think that this mere toy that's floating above us, that was developed in China some apparently 3,000 years ago from strong bamboo and silk, both for the kite itself that created the fabric and the string. You might think that that was a mere toy. However, there's another way of looking at it, which is the issue of games. Right now, we're playing some very reckless games on this planet as I sit here. And our own mortality, you and I and whoever is watching this video, we don't really know what will become of these games. For example, the current great game of geopolitics that literally is causing a vast amount of loss of life and propelling us perhaps into an irrational course that would really, beyond our own mortal coil, propel the human race in a direction which is almost hideously unsalvageable. Irrational to provoke a situation of a game that war has become, financing this game of murder and mayhem, really, as a means of propping up the egos of the players, if you will, on both sides. So that's a very dangerous game that you can't really ignore if you are aware of the events currently unfolding on the planet. However, looking at the game in the way that I just did with the kite, look at the current situation from the standpoint of resolving the irrational game that's being played out on our television screens, our videos, daily. If we want, we can concentrate on that. However, at the same time, that same motive, almost from the standpoint of classical music, you would call it motive führung, a leading motive for the intellectual development of humanity at this day. Think about the fact that the game that we have in advancing science, in other words, the mentality of a child who is fascinated with what can be achieved by the mind by asking questions, by simply proposing the correct questions about the functioning and the makeup of the universe and our place within it. We're at a moment right now which is essentially no different than we were back in my youth with the Kennedy administration, where we made a collective agreement that we will conquer space. We will go to the moon. It was that agreement had long-lasting effects of a decade or so. But in the midst of that, what was occurring out there, as in terms of the other game that I mentioned earlier, the geopolitics, was a drawdown of resources that use science in a way to create death and destruction. Everybody who is my age or older remembers the visions of in Vietnam, the use of horrible chemical weapons, for example. At the same time, we held off the threat of thermonuclear war by making very quiet arrangements to pull U.S. nuclear arms out of, I believe it was Turkey at that point. Interesting that Turkey itself today is at the locus of a similar perhaps making a difference in terms of pulling together a new architecture for advancing the other game. And that's my recent post on China. You can read it on my blog, Thingabob Esquire. Gets to the point of that, because let's go back to China and the kite. Today, what is China doing? They're engaging in a technological race with the U.S. Back with the days of JFK and the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was Russia. And we were engaged with a race to the moon. And JFK said, we will go to the moon. We did. But we left that all behind. We turned inward culturally into a kind of a trip, a journey, in a cynical kind of view of humanity. We turned inward away from that intellectual game. Today, what is China doing? Well, they're developing their own space station, which is currently orbiting, which is a modular space station. I put in my blog of artist rendering of the perhaps wheel around the space station. That those types might even provide inertial equivalent of artificial gravity. They are planning, they say, before the year 2030, or excuse me, 2130, forgetting which century I'm in, because we're going back to Kennedy and so forth, and seeing the same, really the same matrix, in the good sense, not matrix in the stupid sci-fi sense, but the same matrix of decision making right now. So they're going to put a man on the moon, and they're developing something called the EAST, which is a fusion reactor of their own, which I believe they've attained 130 million degrees, which is a record on that. There was just a development of 100 million degrees in a spheromac. Interesting story about that, by the way. As I was involved in going out into airports in the late 70s and 80s and 90s, I met a lawyer one day who was a patent lawyer who was working on patenting the spheromac technology. It's that technology which I just referenced that had just achieved 100 million degrees and is currently being financed. by venture capitalism. This is an interesting point. And I say in this, I briefly just touch on this issue of financing technology. Because if you engage in this game, you will immediately see that if we are going to sustain humanity, we need a new source of energy that not only is energy per se, but that will establish a whole new means of reducing ore to its elemental constituents. For example, let's think of this. We have a space elevator which is hinged on a type of very tough cord of some kind. You can look at the current development of different metallurgy, advancements in that, of which there are many, many examples for what might operate as this type of anchor. Because what it is a elevator that is anchored to the Earth and proceeds up to orbit. So you take that elevator, forget having to have these super rockets to get you tons and tons and tons of stuff into space. You know, because what do we want? We want to be able to go to that elevator and then from there have a launch pad onto a taxi, really, and to the orbital systems that are going to be found there, whereby we can then move our manufacturing process into outer space. And we'd be able to take, for example, with fusion plasma temperatures of millions of degrees that are be available to us, for example, let's say the moon. Let's take the moon as a base up there. What we're going to manufacture up there with the helium-3, which is already there when we've extracted that for nuclear fusion, we're going to take the crust of the moon, we're going to take asteroids, meteors, the stuff that's out there in space, and we're going to refine that to its elemental constituents. And that's going to allow us to create literally in the future, if things go right, and that's what this is about, making sure that we proceed along this pathway, the pathway that I mentioned, going back to China and their technological race. Because if we engage in that race in the right way, and the financiers are convinced that this is the only way to sidestep the current unfurling tragedy of the other great game of mayhem, death, and destruction, then what we're going to do is we're going to have home in space, humanity. Now, I'm sitting in my office here. Am only a small mortal individual, yet I can see beyond my own next 20, perhaps 30 years, because I have a long lived family history. So if I stay in shape and take care of my own physical and mental condition, I perhaps will be here beyond two things: the advent of fusion as energy and the putting a base upon the moon, manufacturing base, and then next Mars. But also at the same time planning ahead to create what Kraft Erica, who I have spoken to one-on-one, was a visionary in terms of not a phony science fiction narrative of some unfathomable era wherein we are fighting aliens, blah, 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 when we get out there. But at any rate, his idea was to build planetoids. And I think of these planetoids as really spaceships. but they're living spaceships. What we've done, what we will do, is combined our knowledge of biophysics, which includes lengthening the lifespan, or rather, better term is health span, way, way beyond where we are right now. Way beyond that. Also, consider the fact that I'm sitting here in front of this video. I can get to, most of the people on the planet that are engaged in technology. I can reach them right now. But imagine reaching people via an internet through a artificial mind reading exercise. What I mean by that is non-invasive, not Elon Musk's Neuralink technology. We don't need to drill into your skull and insert something in your brainstem. Not necessary. We have an electromagnetic ability right now, already proven, to recreate dreams. What we do is there's a kind of a training period that people undergo under a brainwave detection and decoding. So they already have shown that 85% of the sectors in the brain that are trained to show images, that the dreams have these same images, and we can interpret them via electromagnetics. Now, what does that mean in terms of where I'm getting to you right now over the internet? It's sitting in my office here. That means literally we will be able to do things that we can only imagine at the outskirts, say, of our sensorium, of our senses that are augmented by technology. So literally, I'll be able to say, this is a hearing aid I have. I'll be able to tap on it and instantaneously be broadcasting from anywhere. Because what I see will be able to be interpreted without a camera. We won't need a camera because of the utilization of the technology that's emerging right now, brainwaves. Consider that 100, 200, 1,000 years from now and where we will be. It will be almost unfathomable to today's culture. That type of technology, that type of game, truly great games that starts back, let's say, with something very innocent seeming, a kite floating high, high up above us, that captures our imagination in the same way that the imagination of humanity has been captured, say, by the movement of the stars, the sun, the moon. It's captured us and has led us to the task, the great game, of going out there. Why? How has that happened? Because there's a unique quality, nascent, lying in potential in you and I and all of humanity. If that spark is ignited appropriately with the correct pathway of financing, then the current crisis that confronts us can indeed be overcome. And it's interesting that these realizations are partially understood by parts of society, although they don't see the whole picture in the way that I'm laying it out right now. What happens is people get fixated analytically on looking at the current crisis on the ground, so to speak, the crisis of humanity, let's say, in the war that's currently raging. and more than one place, by the way, on the globe. There are more places that it's raging right now. But at the same time, a potentiality for a new race, a new monetary system that can accommodate these types of endeavors. That is where we were back in the era of JFK, 1962. When I was a very small, pre-teenager, I was, 9 years old in 1962. So this era that we're in, if we proceed from the standpoint that rationality, that reason in the broader sense, will win out, in the same way that, let's take a thinker such as Shelley, the poet, when he wrote the Ode to the West Wind. He was enunciating that he really didn't know what the future would be per se. However, he sought out and decoded, if you will, a message from a higher lawfulness that deals with the issue of the mind and beauty. The beautiful that is encapsulated and there in potential in humanity's aspirations to go beyond. Because that really is what we're talking about. As I sit as nearly 70 years old, my birthday's coming up in a few weeks, less than 2 weeks. How do I know that my own voice will be heard appropriately from the standpoint of what I'm laying forward here in terms of a way out, a solution? I really don't, and I can't. But what I can do is put forward ideas that will be capable of transforming the matrix, to go back to that term, but in the good sense of what a matrix is. Not a bad infinity of non-changing sameness, but rather one of transformations of the rules that enhance our humanity, our ability to come into conformity with underlying laws of the universe that allow us to transform our practices and allow us to do things that heretofore would have been thought unimaginable, but that will bring sustenance, allow us to go forth and uncover the ability to have future generations living thousands of years, controlling the proteome, using advancements. We will be able to cure more incurable diseases. We'll be able to extend our health span. We'll be able to go forward on planetoids by perhaps new fuels. We know that around the corner, for example, beyond fusion, which is transformational in and of itself, and it's due to the nature of plasma physics that it is transformational, reducing, or as I said, we'll be able to take material, say asteroids, and get out of those asteroids everything we need to build these planetoids. So that vision, that potentiality is out there, far beyond our own mortal existence in the here and now. So that is pretty much what my message is today. I want to keep it short. You can view on my website the outlines of this, and you can take the ideas that I am putting forth and use those as a generating principle to enable humanity to get beyond the current dilemma and crisis, to get beyond the seeming hectic autumn of the west wind that seems so powerful and so unquenchable. And yet, if we put ourselves out from the standpoint of promoting beauty in the midst of apparent chaos and danger, beauty from the standpoint that I'm talking about a space, technological race, if you will, then we will have saner heads prevail of necessity. And we can see that direction in front of us. And that's what we must latch onto and promote in the best of our powers. Because that's, to use an expression that was used frequently back 50 years ago, that's where it's at. Thank you for joining me this morning. I'll be looking forward to speaking to you again, and have a great day.